another inspiring InspireTalk. I'm in the pilot seat today for the first time. So rather than being the co-pilot, I am the pilot. I'm in the hot seat. So welcome. I am Wendy, part of the InspireTalk team. And as you know, if you've watched some of these previously, but if you haven't, then you won't know. But I have Stuart, who is my colleague, in the hot seat or in the cockpit with me today leading the program. We're really excited because we've got an extremely inspiring entrepreneur, but we'll get to that in a second. This show, as a recap, is all about hearing people's stories and journeys. So not only about their story, about how they've come to create the product and the passion that sits behind it, but also their story as an entrepreneur. So for fellow entrepreneurs and small business owners, or those that are even still in workplaces but have a desire to carve out their own business, this is where you get some nuts and bolts ideas and tips around what it takes to get there. So without any further ado, let me, in a very excited way, because this is an area that I'm passionate about too, good health, and I've just kind of preempted, but Sherry Strong is our guest today. Sherry has a great story to tell. So she is passionate about food. She is a food health expert. She is a celebrity chef. She, well, she'll tell you herself all the various things that she has done and all of her achievements. But one of the things that we'll also be talking today about is the fact that she's the CEO of returntofood.com. So we're really interested in learning more about that as well. So what we might do to kick it off is, let me just hand it over to you, Sherry, just to do a little bit of a synopsis on who you are, and then I'll launch into it and ask you the first question. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be invited. Thank you. Well, do you want me to start from birth? Because that's really where my story began.
Yeah, oh, definitely, wherever your story.
We have a few hours, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of true in the fact that when I was born, my mother was convinced by doctors and nurses that this baby formula, scientifically developed by man, was far superior to breast milk, and that I started off my life on packet food, and in particular in the 60s, not too dissimilar to what happens today, but there were highly refined ingredients like refined sugars, oils, salts, grains, and chemicals, including MSG.
Goodness.
Which is a known neurotoxin now. We know that, and it can actually permeate and penetrate the blood-brain barrier and cause some nasty things that actually happen. And so you can imagine breast milk, basically, in a baby, goes through the entire digestive tract in 20 minutes. And baby formula takes about an hour and a half to go through. And it creates this, so the baby actually drinks more. And it creates this very kind of heavy, intense feeling in the gut. And what this does is it sets the baby up for addiction to refined oil, sugar, salts, chemicals, you know, those things that I call the lethal recipe in the philosophies I teach, and sugar addiction and malnutrition. So children who are raised on this are always a little bit more hungry than others. So that's kind of I'm not going to go through grade 1 till 12, etc. But as a result, I had a lot of nutritional deficiencies and depression that resulted in that. And from that, I became a chef, which led into doing a cooking school. I had a cooking school in Melbourne that I started in 1993 called the Food Lovers Workshop. And from that, it actually led to being involved with Nutrition Australia, and I was the Victorian Chair of Nutrition Australia and the Melbourne President of Slow Food, and then went on to do a lot of television, media, radio, writing, and eventually into the speaking field. And one of the things that I had quickly recognized was that most people were suffering from nutritional confusion. So there was so much information out there that people were massively confused. And so I went, exploring and looking for something, because as the Victorian Chair of Nutrition Australia, I would get journals, clinical journals of, the Asia Pacific clinical journals of nutrition, and they would be really confusing. And what I didn't realize then was how much of the research was industry funded. So the confusion came because one research study would actually contradict another research study, and that companies would actually get when they were actually doing research, would actually get the contracts to do the research on the basis that they would actually have certain findings. So there's a lot of really bad studies out there. So it created this confusion. And when I ask a corporate audience who experiences nutritional confusion, 40% of the hands go up. And when I ask a group of newly graduated nutritionists, 90% of the hands go up. So more information doesn't lead to clarity. And then I develop these philosophies that help people develop a healthier relationship with food, their body, and the planet. And as a result, I branded myself as a food philosopher and was on the speaking circuit. And 4 years ago, this week, in fact, I moved back to Canada after 22 years in Australia on an intuitive hunch that led me to basically developing the business that I have now, which is returntofood.com. And I finally published a book called Return to Food.
Congratulations.
Yeah, the foreword was done by a dear friend of mine named Mariel Hemingway, who you might know her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, and she's a Oscar-nominated actress herself and has written 7 books now, all unrelated to wellness. And is amazing, amazing person. So the business is basically about helping people develop a healthy relationship with food, their body, and the planet. And then from that, the business, I now teach people to become return to food coaches so they can teach other people to do this.
Okay, so that's an amazing journey from birth and formula. And already you've blown me out of the water around some of the statistics that you've mentioned. And that's exciting too that you've moved back to Canada on an intuitive hunch. I mean, there's all sorts of questions I could launch into just from that alone. But and you've already kind of answered in your own introduction the 2 questions I was going to ask, which is fantastic, making my job easier already. So what I might do is actually then hand it over to Stuart to ask the question based on all of that. So lots of things are coming up: nutrition, health, breastfeeding, business. Anyway, go on, Stuart. You can ask a question, then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, look, great story, Sherry, and I love where you've come from and why you've come from there. I'm interested in the aspects of that development from the perspective that you've started off in a profession and then ended up as an international speaker, an international advisor. Perhaps you could just share with us or to the audience, just how that eventuates, because to me it seems like it's been an easy, well, not an easy path, but a seamless path, probably more the appropriate word. How has that eventuated for you? You can take us through that a little bit?
Sure. When you say easy and seamless, I laugh to myself because I really don't know any entrepreneur that has an easy, seamless path. I think. But the key to kind of the thread of truth in that is that I've never doubted my vision and my dream. I've doubted how I was actually going to make money from it many times, but it's just I've never, and what it ended up looking like. So for much of my life in my entrepreneurship, I was always seeking for, I knew I was meant to be on a path. And you get on the path and I didn't necessarily know what the destination looked like, but I knew what it felt like. And so it's interesting because I was asked this question just recently by a student because, often as entrepreneurs, we're seen from the outside as people who are like, oh, now you're interested in this, and then we're all enthusiastic and gung-ho on this, and you abandon that, and then you go on to this, right? That's what we kind of look like. And what I say to people is often when you're on your own path, Joseph Campbell says, if you're on your path because there isn't a path there, you actually have to create your own path. And sometimes you have to get a tool from doing this thing and this thing and this thing, and they all become part of your arsenal or your tool belt that helps you cut your own path and carve your own path. And so I'm a big believer in following intuition, and I think that's probably the thing that's because it did not make sense. It did not make intellectual sense for me to move back to Canada. I spent more time with my family, believe it or not, when I lived in Australia than I do now living here. So it wasn't a matter of like you move to be with your family, although that's lovely knowing that I'm not a 24-hour flight away. But it didn't make intellectual sense. But I've had 2 moments in my life where I've taken kind of what I call emotional bungee jumps. You take these leaps of faith, and you know that it's scary as hell, but then when you actually jump off the precipice, you leap off, the feeling of exhilaration and just the sense of knowing, oh my goodness, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I had it once when I gave a paper at a symposium of gastronomy in Hobart in Tasmania in 1999, September of 99. And I was there with industry experts, you know, Stephanie Alexander, who you'd know, and Gabe Wilson and Maggie Beer, and, you know, Marika Brugman and Sarah Stegley, who had Halkwadale Gourmet Retreat. They were my, you know, heroes. And I actually volunteered to give this paper, and at that time I was like hardly known at all, like, you know, in relative terms, a nobody. I was scared shitless, to be quite honest. And I was going through IVF at the time, so I wasn't able to conceive naturally, and so we went and tried to. So I had a legitimate medical excuse to back out at any time, but I didn't. I took the leap. And I had people in the audience that were crying, you know, and and people who leapt to their feet and clapped. And it was my first real public kind of speech where I'd actually prepared, you know, intellectual philosophies and ideas. And I knew I was meant to be doing that. And when I came back to Canada, I went to the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. They were looking for teachers. And the woman who was interviewing me, the head of school, Shana Grimwood, said, "What class are you interested in teaching?" And I said, have you ever had one of those moments where you're opening your mouth, the words are coming out, and you're going, where in the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
Because you're not editing, it just comes out.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to teach professional skills development, which I'd never done before. It was all about nutrition. And she said, well, that's great, because it's the only class we don't have a teacher for.
Oh, serendipity.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when I started teaching that course to nutritionists, it was the full circle of the hero's journey. I was now coming back and teaching them what I had learned. And it was the exact same feeling of giving that paper at the symposium, scary as hell, jumping off this precipice and feeling, oh my God, this is it. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but that was just what came up for me, Stuart.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic, Sherry, because I think what we've just heard there is in itself immensely valuable for anyone listening in. And look, I know there's a lot of key points in there, but I'm going to take you right back to one of the first ones that you mentioned was, you know, you had doubts about where the money was going to come from. Mm-hmm. And I know with all the coaching and teaching I do, this seems to be the biggest stumbling block for everybody. They just won't do something because where's my money going to come from? And can you just take us through that, because clearly it affects everybody as you go down your path. You've gone down your path, and other guests we've had have gone down their paths, but ultimately the money manifested. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Well, I guess the first thing is I never would recommend anyone who is responsible for family members, you know, and small children to go and, you know, pursue their singing career if they don't have a great voice and quit their job to do it, right? So there's a certain level of responsibility, and you have to understand yourself as well. Some people have a very high tolerance to handle debt, handle risk, and other people don't. And so the people who don't need to actually have what Marie Forleo calls a bridge job, you know, a job that keeps income coming in, and they have to work harder. And the other people who are willing to kind of walk that tight wire of, you know, the income coming in and it's uncertain, have to have that high threshold to be able to tolerate risk. So you have to know where you are. And I'm definitely in the latter group. I just knew that if I worked in a job, I'm the kind of person that would just give it such, you know, 1,000% kind of, that my other vision would be lost. That's just how I work. Whenever I take on a job, you know, I can't not give them 100%, or I'm a terrible, terrible employee, and, you know, I feel really guilty. So I had to walk that tightrope in many respects. But saying that now, I'm actually starting several businesses right now. In order to fund the growth for Return to Food, I'm actually starting another business that I know will bring income in. The important thing for me always was to make sure that it always fit in with my sense of values and integrity. I remember one time I was struggling, and you know, it was another one of those months of where's the rent going to come from? Not the mortgage payment, the rent. And all of a sudden I got a call from an agent saying, we want you to do a commercial. It's going to pay $120,000. It might take 1 or 2 days of work to do. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness, that's so great, right? And then as soon as I said that, my intuition went, oh, what's the product for? And it was a calcium fortified milk with refined sugars, colorings, and flavorings in it designed for young children. And I was like, sorry, I can't do it. Pasteurized milk, you know, colors, flavors, sugar, and you know, most likely a very poor quality calcium that's not good for the human body anyway. And so it's a kind of a line in the sand moment of saying, are you in or you're out? And being so committed. And what I have always learned, and you alluded to this, Stuart, it always shows up. What you need always shows up when you have the faith. And sometimes it requires an act of humility, of asking to borrow some money, or to asking for the sale. You know, it's amazing how often we miss that one. We just want the money to show up, but we haven't had the humility or, you know, the conviction to just ask for the sale. So it's always there. And what I find, what's always amazed me is, and I'm obviously a big fan of Joseph Campbell. In fact, I included the holistic hero's journey in the back of my book because it's slightly different, but it follows that line. But when you're so committed to your dream, when you so believe it, as he says, doors will open where you didn't even know doors existed, and it happens continually. So it's about having faith and having a big vision, and really tapping into, why am I doing this?
Okay, so it is really a powerful combination of listening to the intuition, having the passion and conviction, and following the path or creating the path, because there is no path. And I really liked that little metaphor around the arsenal and picking up tools and things and slashing your way through this uncharted path. So it is that. It sounds like it's also the ability to have faith that when you need something, it will appear. I also like what you've said around humility. At times, having the humility to ask for the sale. So really powerful stuff. I also have really picked up on the fact that you've mentioned Joseph Campbell and Marie Forleo. So my next question then, Sherry, is how important has that been to you, good people, to learn from mentors along your path? And could you give us, apart from Marie and Joseph, some other examples of people that have really helped you on your journey?
For me, I don't think you ever stop learning from other people, you know, and to me that's why education is so incredibly important. So I invest regularly, as anyone that I know who's, you know, an entrepreneur, they're investing in their education. And there's many people who you'd know their names, and then there's other people who you wouldn't know their names. They're not out there. I'm as inspired by, believe it or not, I'm as inspired by someone who will actually stay in a job to take care of their family honorably as someone who's actually willing to take that leap of faith to follow their own path. In fact, in many ways, I feel a lot more compassion for people who will actually stay in a job. For me, it's kind of one of those things that you have to have great resolve to actually do that. It's because to me, it's a form of sacrifice. If you're not loving what you do, it's a huge sacrifice for your family to stay in a job to take care of them. But there's many entrepreneurs that aren't doing well financially that I admire more than those who are billionaires. So in my private practice as a nutritionist, I've had clients who are billionaires. And that it's really true. I've seen firsthand evidence of it, of that expression about happiness. The studies have shown that beyond $70,000 a year, there's no difference in the level of happiness than that of someone who's earning $70,000 and that of a billionaire. And what I've seen time and time again in every socioeconomic level is there's a place where you are running your life, you're in charge of your life, and your life is in charge of you. And so for me, it's not, you know, some of the people who are entrepreneurs who actually make modest incomes, they're over that $70,000 a year, but they're carving their own path. They're following their values and their integrity, and no one would know, you know, no one in Australia would know, you know, some of their names, and no one in North America might know their names, but they're living honorable lives, they're taking care of their family, and they're carving their own path. And I think one of the kind of the pitfalls of entrepreneurship is to determine your level of success based on your income level, and
right.
rather than the difference that you're making in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really sobering thing, because we often hear about being inspired and needing to be inspired by those that are making over $1 million a year, but that's so true, that once your basic needs are met at about 70,000, the two together, basic needs plus following who you are, your gifts, is extremely powerful. And I loved what you said about you're as inspired by the humble person that's just feeding the family as much as you are the Richard Bransons of the world.
Yeah.
Stuart,
Sorry.
you're on mute. Yeah, go for it.
I was on mute. It was clever, wasn't it? I find too, Sherry, that people are preoccupied with the end result. So they're aiming for something in their life, and that's consuming them, and they're forgetting about the journey. And you know, really, it's the journey that's the fun part. That's the time that they should be having the most out of their lives, because that's what's taking them to what they want to get to. So it's very interesting how people perceive these things. Can I ask you to tell us a little bit about, or a bit more about your business, where you're taking it in the future, and how you hope that it's going to help our audience in any way they can?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because it's interesting. Everyone's interested in food. I remember Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk, which when I saw, I was like, I knew I was meant to give a TED Talk. You know, I just knew that I was going to give a TED Talk, and I fortunately finally was able to in 2009 in Tokyo. So that was pretty exciting. But he said, when you're a teacher, everyone at a dinner party is interested in talking about, when you're a teacher, he said, people sit beside you at a dinner party and the blood drains from their face, thinking, oh my God. He said, but when you ask them about their education, they become alive. You know, they you know, when you think about their teachers, same thing with food. Anyone who sits by a nutritionist at a dinner party, oh my goodness, I resist saying that I need either a chef or a nutritionist, because people no longer enjoy their food or the same way as if they don't know you are. Every single person has a relationship with food. And what I've learned in doing almost 20 years now of lifestyle makeovers and going into people's homes and teaching them about food and cooking is that for most of us, it's dysfunctional. And for many people, what they think is healthy is not actually healthy. And now they'll go into a home of a couple. I did one for a young couple, well, youngish. They were fit and healthy by anyone's standards, but suffering from disease. And we make this big assumption that because people are thin and they're fit, you know, and they look great, that they're healthy, and it's not true. And disease crops up in many different ways. And so I've seen thousands of people over the years who are literally suffering from lifestyle diseases based on primarily how they're eating. It's a lot about how they're living as well. And I've seen how that disrupts everything. And I've, like, when I do these lifestyle makeovers and go into the homes, and now I'm teaching coaches to do this, we literally will be taking out, in some cases, oops, sorry about that, I forgot to mute that. In some cases, thousands of dollars worth of food going straight into the rubbish bin. And they're blown away, like, oh, but I thought that was healthy, but that was sold as healthy, that's marketed as healthy. And so the thing that kind of inspires me why I do what I do is that not only is that food not healthy for you, it's not healthy for the body and the environment. Okay, so there's a direct correlation. So nature tells us what it is we're meant to be eating and the quantities we're meant to be eating it by how easily it's obtained in nature. So that which is most abundant we're meant to have the most of, harder to obtain we're meant to have less of it. And if you cannot get it in nature, not only is it harmful to your body, it's harmful to the environment. And it's a universal axiom, and I've never seen an example that goes outside of that. So that's one of the kind of primary philosophies I teach. And when I see people starting to take out what I call this lethal recipe and replacing it with real food, like I have a 7-day return to food challenge, and all you do is you simply take every food that you have and just make sure it's real food, make sure it's natural, organic, unprocessed. And the transformations that I've seen in people's lives impacts everything. Energy levels, mood, weight, which is a big thing that, but it's in many cases more superficial thing. And I'll tell you why, because the body actually creates fat cells to store excess toxins away from vital organs. You're super fit and thin and you're working on a really low body percent fat and you're eating a toxic diet based on calories and these protein powders with highly processed ingredients, the toxins that your body doesn't know actually how to deal with and eliminate get stored in your body. And if you don't have fat cells, it goes directly into your vital organs. And that's where disease thrives. And I'm not just saying this as someone who's been formerly twice their size, not 10'4", okay, so I was like 5'2", size 16, so I was basically round. And I often bring up this point, not, because, to kind of say that you can actually be healthier in a fat body than you can in a thin body if you're not eating real food. And there's so much misinformation out there. People need clarity, and in the business that I run, the philosophies I teach, they cut through a lot of nutritional confusion. So people just get it. And I've had students who are registered holistic nutritionists who have done, 2 years of study, have said that, basically, in a one-day seminar, I've actually learned more about how to practically teach other people about what it is and how it is we're meant to be eating than I did in 2 years of study. So it's about cutting through the confusion and giving people real practical tools to start to develop this healthy relationship with food, their body, and the planet.
Wow, that's amazing. Even the things that you've said around, the protein powders, because we're all led to believe that protein powders are good. Like, for example, I have a son who's training to be an elite ballet dancer, and the nutritionist said, yeah, protein powders, he needs them because he's not getting enough in the natural food. So you've kind of thrown that on its head as well, especially that thing around be careful around how a lot of it is around marketing. So get the true message, not the loaded message. I'd like to, while we're just talking about food in a deep way and health and well-being, to touch on the thing that's close to most people's hearts at the moment: depression, anxiety, stress. Now, my understanding is it's because we're not getting enough of the things that we need, like magnesium and so on, and the lifestyles that we're leading. Could you just spend a couple of minutes chatting about that, Sherry?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I say to people, it's much more important when you're first looking at this to look at what not to eat than what to eat. You see, that whole thing of the protein myth, it's crazy, and it's so driven by marketing. The largest, most muscly beasts on the planet are all vegetarian. None of them have protein powders.
Wow.
They eat green things, and there's tons of protein in that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How many people in Australia have you ever heard of that have kwashiorkor disease, protein deficiency? None. It's incredibly rare, unless. But the nutrients that people are, saying we really need and we're not getting enough of, the biggest factor that drives nutrient deficiency in the North American diet is the presence of eating highly processed food, which is nutrient deficient, and what I call this lethal recipe of refined sugars, oils, salts, grains, and chemicals. And anything can be made into the lethal recipe when you process any food the same way they take opium sap and turn it into heroin, or coca leaves and turn it into cocaine, using heat, toxic chemicals, and removing macro and micronutrients. It turns into something addictive and toxic to the body. And in the instance of things like refined sugars and refined grains and like high fructose corn syrup and the white super processed grains, even if they're gluten-free, can literally be sucking nutrients from the body and leaching, causing nutrient leaching from our body. If you go into any traditional culture that was just had access to real food, natural food, unprocessed food, you didn't see the same kind of vitamin, deficiencies that we're actually seeing en masse from people who are eating in the highly processed world. And there's a fantastic book called The Hungry Planet, What the World Eats, by Faith Deluzio and Peter Menzel. And you may have seen the Time Life magazine article that showed the pictures of the family in the magazine where they had them put out their weekly groceries in front of them.
Oh, yeah.
So you see different countries, and what they put in front of them tells a story. And it's a really interesting thing. When I was presenting this at the Westpac Bank, one of my clients at the Westpac Bank in Melbourne, she was saying, but that family, Sherry, with all that processed food, they look healthy. And I said, and she was a very large woman at the time, so she's had years of indoctrination that thin is healthy and fat is bad, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, do they look healthy or do they look thin? Because if you actually look at the skin of the children, it's kind of blotched and mottled, right? So, and I said, bear with me. And I go through the slides and I show the different slides of the different families. And I finish off with a slide of a woman who is in a refugee camp in Chad in Africa. She has 5 children. And she's feeding her 5 children on the equivalent of what in Australia would cost us about $30 a week to feed herself and 5 children. And you look down, and it's basically kind of beans and rice, very little, anything else, just water. And I said, look at the jaw development of the children, which Weston A. Price showed that jaw development, head formation is a real indicator of health. Their skin is perfectly clear, shiny, beautiful, flawless, and their teeth are perfectly formed because they don't have refined sugar, they don't have refined grains. And when I gave my TED Talk in Tokyo, I said, do you think this woman, when she's putting her food on the plates for her children each night, says, don't worry about finishing everything on your plates, kids, because there are obese kids in America, in Australia, right? And I said, before you think I'm being cavalier about this, starving children is a terrible thing, although these children weren't starving. They were in a refugee camp, so they were being taken care of. But 27,000 children a year at that point when I gave the talk were dying from starvation. And over 42,000 children were dying due to the processed diet. So we often think of that it's about the diet we're meant to be eating, the macro and micronutrients, and we're worried about weighing everything. But I often point out that the healthiest cultures on the planet have no idea what their recommended daily intake of vitamin C is, or how much protein they need, or, are they getting enough calcium? They eat in context of nature, and nature provides them what they need. And the human body is highly adaptable as long as we're eating from a natural diet. So like the traditional Inuits in the Arctic would be eating up to 80% seal blubber of their diet. Not that I want to eat that diet. It's a lot healthier than the standard American diet or the highly processed diet. So we need to start using not just our intellect, but wisdom, experience, and integrate that with our gut and our instinct and observing what's truly worked rather than being fooled and manipulated by nutritional marketing.
Okay, so that's the perfect, powerful message about not being manipulated. Think differently, look differently, observe differently. Don't be manipulated by marketing, and go back to nature. When you're unsure, look back to nature. Really powerful. So, Stuart, would you like to ask one perhaps final business-related entrepreneurial question because we're just about running out of time, and then we'll open it to Sherry to see if there's one more powerful thing that she would like to add to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wendy. So look, it's really a lot that you've given us here today, Sherry, and really appreciate it. In terms of if you were going to tell somebody today how to commence a pathway or a journey of their own, what would you say to them?
The first thing that I do with clients is I do get them to write down everything they eat, and not from a perspective of judging right and wrong, but to create some kind of awareness. I'm really big on doing all of this from a place of love and non-judgment, and just starting to objectively look and see at what we're eating. And then to start to listen to their body, to look at when they actually eat a food, what actually goes on in their body. So for me, I have I have a concept where I call pick your poison. So I love a good cup of coffee, and I believe in traditional cultures they had their poisons. You know, they had something they drank or smoked or ate that created some kind of, you know, reaction in the body that wasn't about health, and they enjoyed that, and it was part of the picture. The issue is just remember to find the most natural versions of that, and remember there's an accumulative effect. So I have 1 to 3 cups of coffee a week, and there's a ritual around it, right? I only drink a very good cup of coffee, so it's taken years for Vancouver to get coffee anywhere near as good as Melbourne. So I finally found some places that, believe it or not, are as good, and that's just recently. And I go and I never get a cup of coffee to take away. It is my drug ritual. I bring my own coconut palm sugar. I have a latte. I make sure it's not too, you know, too weak, not too strong. You know, I've got a lot of weird stuff around it. Anyway, and I sip and I'm present for that. Right? It's like something I thoroughly enjoy, and I know it's like a great cup of coffee when there's almost like someone who's had a cigar. You know, it's got those cigar kind of complexity and flavors and textures to it. Mm. So it's about being mindful about what we're eating. Now, when I have that cup of coffee, I know that it's a drug in my body, and particularly because I'm only having 1 to 3 cups a week, the effects of it are very pronounced. When you're drinking, you know, I was talking to at a cooking class I did on the weekend, a woman was saying that she has like 5 to 6 double shot Americanos each day. I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And she was actually buying them out. You could start a business with just your coffee budget. So I go through, there's this beautiful kind of rush. There's the ritual that, you know, it's all around it. There's the anticipation. There's the heightened kind of, there's the caffeine that hits my body. There is the dairy. So there's opiates in the dairy that are actually hitting my body. And there's the sugar, you know, so there's lots of things going on. And as soon as I finish that cup of coffee, I'm like, I want to text everyone and tell them I love them, or phone some. I have to phone some up and tell them I love them, because all those love drugs are like, you know, coursing through my body. And most people would have, and then, oh, here's the other thing. 15 minutes later in traffic, as I'm coming down from that, I'm yelling at people in traffic and cursing. So it's like the downside of it, right?
Interesting.
So the thing is to start to understand that most of us don't actually eat food based on the flavor. We think it's about the flavor. But how many people have you seen drink a really bad cup of coffee and say it's disgusting? And I'm like, why are you finishing it? Oh, because it's good. But clearly you just said it's disgusting, it's not good. So, and then they'll drink things and eat things and smoke things that really don't have a great taste, but then a green smoothie comes up and they're just like, man, I can't stand that, that's disgusting. Mm-hmm. What they're really saying is that there's no kind of drug-like payoff from it that's willing, you know, I'm willing to go through that initial pain of the bitterness, you know, to an acid palate, it's going to come up. So start to become aware about how food affects you and how it actually feels in your body. And I can tell you from working with clients who have had diseases like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all of those, any disease, there were always ways their body tried to communicate to them that they were actually getting sick. And they failed to listen to it. They brushed it off, or they took a pill that suppressed the symptom that came up and it was expressed in another way. So the big thing is to start to create awareness, start to look and change your thinking around food. That's the big thing. That's what Return to Food does. And the philosophies that I help people with is it changes the way you look and think and feel about what it is you're eating in the relationship to your body and the planet. Okay.
Is that perhaps the one powerful message that you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with, or is there one other final sentence that you'd like to give the listeners?
I think in keeping with that, as an entrepreneur, most of you have like a big vision for the world, and we often will think, well, I'm just going to grab this, I'm just going to eat this because I've got bigger and better things to do than worry about nutrition. And if you can just invest a bit of time, even if it's as simple as starting the day with a green smoothie, not with the protein powders, but a real, true green smoothie, or a salad each day, even if it's just one of those things. Like when I make chia pudding for in my classes, when I teach people, I'm saying, do you realize that in this chia pudding, what you're about to eat here, there's more nutrition than billions of people on the planet get for their entire day, right? So if you can just start off with one thing, and that one thing you can build on that thing. Because what's it worth if you have a big vision like Steve Jobs, but you die in your 50s from pancreatic cancer because you didn't spend that time really taking care of your vehicle that impacts not just your family, around you, but has the potential to impact the world, to learn to really be present, to take care of this incredible body that you have, so that you can actually be around to enjoy not just the journey, but the fruits of your labor and everything you're working for.
Fantastic, fantastic. It must be serendipity, because someone just told me yesterday about a story. As a business consultant, they'd helped somebody for a whole year get their business in shape to be a successful entrepreneur so that he could go and spend more time with his family. The weekend he was spending more time with his family after this whole year of hard work was the weekend that he dropped dead of an aneurysm. And so there was a powerful message in there. The body and his health had been neglected, and they thought that all the answers lay in the business model and the business strategy. So an extremely powerful message to leave us on, Sherry, and I really thank you. And I invite all of the listeners out there to hop on returntofood.com as the first step in learning more, and perhaps even just writing down the biggest sobering thing that you learnt from Sherry today, that learnt from this hangout, and then inviting you to, yes, definitely hop on returntofood.com and dig a little bit deeper. That's certainly what I'll be racing off to do now. So thank you on all levels. From a health level, I thank you, my family thanks you, and certainly from the entrepreneurial point of view as well. So I'm signing off, and I'll just hand it over to perhaps Stuart to say one last thing, and then we'll leave it. So thank you so much.
Oh, Wendy, may I offer a gift, a special offer to your...
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Listeners?
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Yes.
So I would love to gift you a $27 ebook that is called 7 Recipes for Life. It's the precursor to the book I wrote, Return to Food. And it has 7 recipes for life that if they just incorporate that, it will actually start to make a huge difference in their life. And they'll also start to understand the philosophies that shift the thinking around food. So you just need to email me, sherry@returntofood.com.
Okay. Email sherry@returntofood.com.
Yes.
To get your copy of the ebook, which normally retails at $27, and what a fantastic, perfect way to start. Thank you. That's great. I'll certainly be racing off to do that. That's the first thing I'm going to do when I get off here as well. Thank you. And it's just then for you, Stuart, to end on any wise words that you have. But thank you to all the viewers and listeners out there for tuning in. For those that are watching the replay, well done. I'm saying to you, make sure that you watch it all. Don't flick through it from beginning to end. But of course, if you've hopped out halfway through, you won't see me saying this. But my energy is encouraging you to watch all the way through to the end. So thank you. Thanks again, Sherry. Thanks, Stuart. Stuart, wise words to finish on.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Sherry. Really great having you on the show, Sherry, and really high-quality content that you've provided us. So I very much appreciate that. Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody watching in. And with that, we're going to close out. Thank you.